For this section, we'll be going over some basics of evasion, what it is, an example of how a blue teamer could spot malicious activity, and a few videos that show some quick demos like how a red teamer could minimize their tracks from getting caught. When a red teamer is doing anything on a target network, it is in the red team's best interest to do it while remaining undetected. Because in the end, it comes to a cat and mouse game where a blue team is looking for your presence on the network and trying to kill your connection one way or another. Two of the most common ways a blue teamer might catch and stop you are either by terminating the connection to your IP address or stopping your process and or deleting your payload. This is of course assuming they just want to get rid of you instead of taking a step back and watching what you are doing every step of the way. That way they can learn what your objective is. Now, there are ways to mitigate these actions as a red teamer, depending on how advanced and skilled you are, but also some C2 post-exploitation frameworks have added features to help in this arena as well. When it comes to mitigation, your mindset as a red teamer must be in the realm where you are asking questions like, how do I blend into my target network? What looks normal? What security defenses are implemented on the network? Like maybe an IDS or IPS, a firewall, any host-based loggers, or an antivirus, or anything else. The more you understand your target environment, the better the chance of you blending in. Think of it this way. If you cashed out $1 million from your bank account right now and you're in a ghetto part of town, would you walk out with a business suit with the money in a nice briefcase? Or would you wear something that blends into your environment? Like maybe put the cash in a worn out backpack and walk normally through the crowd. It is this type of awareness of knowing your target network that's important. You might be wondering, what are some options for you to do evasion on the target environment? It may require some knowledge of your environment you are going up against. Well, the first method is pretty straightforward: to disable any security defenses you run into. This would sort of be like that spy movie approach of shooting down cameras, although it is very effective at preventing your tactic from being stopped by anything automated. It could be a major red flag for any active security defender on the network if they notice their defense is going down. This is probably not the best approach if you want to stay under the radar and you don't want your target to know you were ever even there. The next option is to blend into your environment, sort of like walking into the person's territory undetected by wearing the same clothes or uniform and maybe a fake badge that seems right. For the target network, you could potentially do this by doing things like making your HTTP, HTTPS, or any other protocol's traffic for that matter very similar to the rest of the traffic going on. Maybe using names for things like processes, executables, and such that blend in with the rest, changing timestamps of files uploaded to others around it, or maybe even stealing and using the session of the person already logged into the target. Last example is by using unwatched areas. This requires you to know way more about the security defenses you are going up against. Sort of like if you know a security guard's daily patrol path and knew the areas he never checks. For example, maybe there's a host-based logger that you grab the configuration files for and find what areas it targets and which areas it ignores. You may ask yourself the question, is there any exclusion? A simple example is the antivirus could have an added exclusion for a folder which won't ever flag for any virus put in the folder. So as a red teamer, you successfully find a way to blend into your target environment, accomplish your tasks, and decide it's time to leave. But since there's logs left behind, whether suspicious looking activity or normal, it is probably best to clear those tracks. You may want to check for any Windows logs on the system you are on. Also check if there's any remote server that's collecting logs. Check if you can access the log server, and if so, can you clear specific logs off it? What about any security tools installed on the system? Are there any additional logs from these tools being stored somewhere for the security defenders to view later? Also be concerned about any potential log that could be created when you close a session to a system. When conducting any red team operations, it is vital to ensure you make note of every artifact you put on the target system. These include any scripts, executables, or any files you staged in another directory, whether compressed or not. Now, if you are a defender and trying to find malicious activity, you might find yourself looking through many logs if you're trying to pin down where the red teamer might be. Although, depending on which logs to narrow down on can really depend on how advanced your opponent is. For example, a beginner level adversary might depend on automated tools to do their tactics and might not even be concerned as much about evasion. You could probably just take a step back and let your security measures do most of the work, or alarm you where the red teamer is. On the other hand, the more advanced the red teamer is, the more effort and thinking you might have to put into figuring out what's going on. For example, maybe you find a point where the attacker was, and are trying to follow the tracks to figure out what the attacker did and where the attacker currently is on the network. Maybe you will be thrown off when trying to follow obvious tracks that the attacker placed on purpose to try to throw you off. Whatever the case is, it is vitally important for someone in cybersecurity to understand general red team tactics and how they work, to understand how they can take apart what's going on in their network. Let's use the antivirus on your computer as an example. Sure, if you keep it up to date, it'll catch most, if not all, the latest automated payloads and viruses out there. But if an adversary targeting you spent more time on his craft, he could easily obfuscate his payload to bypass any antivirus. And in this case, if you depend on automated antivirus scanners waiting for a flag to come up for malicious activity, you'd be doomed against any more advanced adversary. By having knowledge of how a payload works, or any malware for that matter, you could manually find that suspicious activity on your computer or network and eradicate that issue. So, in the end, it really depends on your skill as a defender or attacker on how well you can either catch or evade on the target network. So, I'm going to be going over a demo of how you could use a potential tool a blue teamer could use, such as Sysmon, to detect a basic automated lateral movement from a C2 post-exploitation framework. Sysmon is a pretty popular system monitoring tool as part of Windows Sysinternal Suite, created in 1996. It provides capabilities of monitoring and logging system activity of things such as process creations, network connections, file creation times, and much more. If you want to follow along in this demo, just download the Sysinternal Suite from Microsoft and then get a configuration file. I would just recommend getting the most popular Sysmon configuration file from Swift on Security, which you can download on GitHub. Now just keep in mind before this demo that there are so many ways to go down this evasion rabbit hole, and it just gets exponentially more advanced along the way. Let's just keep in mind this is a beginner's course and go from there. Okay, so if you want to just follow along, I'm going to install Sysmon really quick. We'll need to have an administrator command prompt to be able to do this. So open one up, and let's take a look in this folder. I have an XML file that's a Sysmon configuration file from Swift on Security's GitHub page. And we'll use sysmon64.exe if you're installing Sysmon on a 64-bit operating system. I'll change directory to the Sysmon folder, and I'll run sysmon64. I'll accept the EULA right now in command prompt so I don't have to click yes on any EULA pop-up. And then I'll type taci to set the configuration file I want to use during the installation. And after installing Sysmon, I can open up the event viewer under Applications and Services, Microsoft, Windows, and scroll down to Sysmon. and then check operational, and you'll see the current events that it has logged so far. So we can just clear the logs by clicking Clear Log on the right side panel. Let's clear the logs, and I'll run a lateral movement from a popular C2 post-exploitation framework, and let's see if we can catch the activity and determine what type of lateral movement I did. So I just ran a lateral movement from a popular C2 post-exploitation framework, and you can either press F5 or click refresh on the right side panel to show the latest logs captured. It looks like here we have the activity that was logged by Sysmon for the lateral movement. We can see multiple events being logged along the way, such as file creation, registry value set, processes being created, terminated, and so on. If we click on the file create event that took place, it looks like an executable with a random file name C9300-9b.exe, which was created on C Windows. Next, it looks like we have two registry values set, and clicking on one, it seems like Windows services.exe is doing something with starting the executable. Under the process create event, notice services.exe as the parent process, and scroll up to notice it is executing the random executable C9300-9b.exe. The next process create, we can see the random executable is now the parent process. Scroll up and notice the random executable started up rundll32.exe. Next, it looks like the random executable's process was terminated. There was a DNS query from the process rundll32.exe. Then, it looks like there's one more registry value set that has to do with services.exe. Just for your knowledge and awareness, the D word that's set as 4 is what happens when you do a service deletion with a service control manager. Finally, let's look at the network connection and take note that rundll32.exe is being run as system, and its destination IP is .130, which is the attacker IP the payload is calling back to on port 80. So just to quickly review some of these logs, we can see some pretty sketchy things going on, from down to even a random exe being created in C Windows or the admin share. And looking at all the steps of a random file being created on the system, being ran from Windows services, then spawning another process and deleting itself is pretty much as I said before with how automated PSExec laterals typically work on some C2 frameworks. Now this doesn't mean don't use the C2 post-exploitation framework, it just means that you need to be aware of this before doing your red teaming. Maybe you are facing a blue team that's not up to skill and needs the training, so you don't mind giving yourself away. Or maybe you want to start off easy, then progressively get harder for the blue team, or the other way around. Either the case, this specific C2 post-exploitation framework I used for this automated lateral does have the option for you to create your own customized versions of TTPs. So you wouldn't have this issue if you spent some time developing the lateral movement yourself. Now, we previously went over an example of how a blue teamer could use a host activity logger, such as Sysmon, to see a simple automated lateral movement from a C2 post-exploitation framework. But what could you as a red teamer do to fight back? Well, remember in the brief on Evasion how I mentioned 3 potential ways you could think about for bypassing a security tool. That is, disabling, blending in, and the unwatched areas. How about I show you a quick example for all 3 against Sysmon? For any security tool you are up against, you could think of these general ways when doing red teaming. Although maybe you can use your own creativity and think of more ways as well. So let's say I just got a shell on the system. As a red teamer, you might want to check what security tools are on the system. Part of that can be to first check processes running. Looking here, we have sysmon64.exe running. Now, we could also always use various other ways such as through PowerShell, Wimic, or registry as well. But did you know a blue teamer could just rename the process for sysmon to something else? How would you find if sysmon was running? Luckily, another way is you could always check altitude numbers, which sysmon will always be 385201. Check this with FLTMC. Notice the filter name sysmon driver and the altitude number. Just be aware that a blue teamer could also rename the filter name as well, so look for that number instead. Now that we know the security tool is running, we can then see if there are any configuration files on the host. With sysmon, you could go to the executables path and use -c to get configurations. Of course, you could also always get lucky and find a configuration file on disk. You can find where sysmon's file is from the process by Wimic process where name equals sysmon64.exe get executable path. With the path to sysmon's executable found, we can then execute the sysmon64.exe with the full path with a -c to get the current sysmon configuration. Now that we have the configurations, let's think of ways to bypass and/or evade sysmon. Thinking back to what I mentioned, we could also disable it, blend in, or go in the unwatched areas. With the sysmon configuration file, we could definitely play around the rules and look for those ways to blend in or find areas not logged. So let's find a way to do each of these two first. To show it in a simpler format, I'll just open this on the Windows machine in Internet Explorer. So first, let's see if we can find any unwatched areas. Let's go search for the file create event ID. Taking a look here, it is flagging on anything under the rule file create on match include, which looks like the downloads folder is under. Let's just quickly test that by creating a text file in the downloads folder. Looks like it is flagging on any file created in the downloads folder. Let's test creating a text file in desktop. It seems like it didn't flag a file creation event ID. Let's try to upload test.exe to the desktop folder. Why did it flag? Looking down further in the configuration file, it looks like it just flags on any file with extensions such as .exe, .jar, and so on. Let's rename test.exe to test.blah on the attacker Kali machine. And check it out, no flag. What if I renamed it now? I'll just run the move command, which doesn't actually create a new file, to change test.blah to test.exe. It looks like no event still. Now let's try to run it. Execute tacf test.exe. And there was a process create event ID. Basically, you get the idea. Do something similar for process creation to evade that as well. Now think of doing a lateral to another system and not flagging any sysmon event IDs while doing so. Pretty cool. Just remember about any other security tools there could be on the systems and also your network activity as well. These are all factors when it comes to evasion. Finally, we can always disable sysmon, and a simple way to do that is to unload the sysmon driver. Remember when we used FLTMC to view the altitude to determine sysmon is running? Well, FLTMC is an executable that comes with Windows which does mini filter driver management. You can load filters, unload filters, list filters, and so on. So if the name of the sysmon driver is sysmondrv, we can just type FLTMC unload sysmondrv to then cause the system to drop recording sysmon event logs, except for networking. What's great is that the system might still think that sysmon is still running just fine, yet pretty much nothing is happening. Take a look. Let's open calc.exe and look at the sysmon event log viewer, refresh, and see the process create log come up. Now let's unload the sysmon driver with FLTMC. As a blue teamer, you might want to take note of any event ID 255. Open Calc again and refresh the log viewer. And there isn't another log created. Now when it comes to red teaming, just like with Evasion, it's really up to your creativity as an operator with how you go under the radar. There is a limitless amount of ways. For example, have you thought of maybe even changing the configuration file to not log what you want? Just play with your imagination, think outside the box, and keep trying things out. And as a blue teamer, you'll have to do the same thing to catch a good red teamer.